Jeremy, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to ask you right off the bat, we heard from the defense attorneys of Alec Baldwin. We heard from the prosecutor really outlining the arguments that the jurors are going to be listening to over the next number of days. What are your takeaways from those opening statements?
It's about what we thought it would be. Prosecution really keying in on Alec Baldwin's statement that he didn't pull the trigger. The defense also making it clear, look, he was told that there was no bullet in the chamber. He was told that the gun was cold. And so those are the two really starkly contrasting narratives, if you will. But we have to go back to Monday, where the judge made a really, really critical ruling, which said you can't talk about Alec Baldwin as a producer. I'm sure the prosecution would be much rather talking in their opening statement about basically what you might just call a frat party of a film shooting, right? Talking more about Halyna Gutierrez-Reed, talking about how her negligence, and then attributing it to Alec Baldwin as the producer. They can't do that now. And because they can't do that, they're really sort of stuck in a narrow frame, if you will, of just the few minutes before and after the shooting. Standard that we would see the first witness be the police officer who got there, watching body camera, orienting the jury to the world that they're going to live in for the next few days.
And let's go back to that very critical decision by the judge on Monday, really outlining for our viewers who might really not understand the significance. But as a producer of a movie, that producer is in charge of everything that happens, whereas an actor really is the one receiving instruction and doesn't have to be responsible or accountable for all the other parts, which is really what that argument would have centered around. Hearing the testimony, I'm curious, from the very first witness, does anything jump out at you with the line of questioning or the responses given?
No, this is the first inning of a baseball game. So this is really introductory type stuff. Nothing too earth-shattering, at least quite yet. And to kind of talk about sort of the point that you were talking about before, that the buck stops with the producer. Think of it like this for the people at home. If the person from Pizza Hut runs a red light to deliver a pizza really quickly, hits somebody and hurts them very badly, do we go throw the manager of the Pizza Hut in jail? Not necessarily, right? Pizza Hut, the company, may be on the hook for the money damages there. But when it comes to a criminal case, if the person running the red light, the driver, committed a crime, then they may be liable. So in this instance, what we're doing is we're only looking, like you said, at Alec Baldwin, the actor, and the few minutes before and the few minutes after. I know the prosecution would rather look at the broader pattern of these things. There's also footage that they're not allowed to introduce, which shows Alec Baldwin kind of hurrying, kind of rushing some of the film crew, particularly in a scene where he's firing blanks. So I think they're trying to show a pattern of recklessness, and I don't know that they're going to get to do that either. So really, and that's what effective lawyers do, is they pare down the opposition's case and they win the thing before it's even done. Now, we don't know that this may very well be a guilty verdict. We don't know that. But I think the real story is what is not being said in these arguments, and what we're not going to be hearing from the witness stand.
And sometimes that's even more significant, that what is being discussed, what is being questioned. Of course, the million-dollar question that everyone wants to know is, will Alec Baldwin take the stand? What are your thoughts on this? He is a celebrity. There might be some sympathy towards him. If you were his attorney, what would you advise him? Do you think it's possible?
It's possible, yes. And that may be for reasons like you just said. He's a celebrity. Probably a bit of an ego there, thinks he can work the room maybe a little bit better than he can. But he said some things already on camera which make me not want to put him on there. He talked about, and it really feeds into the whole prosecution's theme, which is that, look, Alec Baldwin did this interview where he said I didn't pull the trigger. Well, I think they're probably going to be able to prove that it's very, very possible, if not likely, that he did pull the trigger. And that's real. And his defense lawyer already tried to separate themselves from that in opening, saying, look, even if he pulled the trigger, he's not committing a crime. And he's not committing a crime because he thought the gun was cold. So I think the defense wants to really just sort of detach that issue. So I would feel pretty confident saying that his lawyers, because of those previous statements, want to keep Alec Baldwin off. But the right to testify, that's Alec's. And if Alec thinks he's the smartest guy in the room, maybe he gives it a run.
Again, as you mentioned, this is really only the first day. The trial is expected to last around 10 days or so. Much more testimony anticipated. There could be twists and turns. From what we have heard, though, on day one, at this point in time, from your legal expertise, who has presented a stronger case?
I really liked what the defense had to say, basically saying, look, even if the guy pulled the trigger, he's not guilty. So the prosecution can stand, because the prosecution's biggest point is that Alec Baldwin said, I didn't pull the trigger, and then they're going to be able to prove that that was possibly a lie. Anytime you can prove the defendant lied in a case, you've got a really good advantage. And the defense has basically taken the approach of, look, we don't care about any of that. Even if they're right and he lied about it, who cares? Because it's about whether or not he thought that that weapon was cold. And if he was told that it was cold and they can prove that he was told that that weapon was cold, they've got a really good chance at acquittal. They made that clear in their opening. So I like what I heard from the defense. I didn't hear much from the prosecution that's able to sort of broaden that scope as they were already limited.
I also want to ask you about Halyna Gutierrez-Reed. She was the movie's armorer. She already was on trial. She was convicted on her charge. Could she take the stand?
She could, and that's a really interesting point that you bring up, Stephanie, because she also has the Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. She was already convicted in trial, but her case is still on appeal. So you still have the right to not incriminate yourself. If her case goes up and gets overturned on appeal, if she were to testify and not invoke the Fifth, they could use some of the things that she said against her. So she has been, from what I've read, she's actually been shipped from wherever in New Mexico that she's been in jail. They've actually shipped her to Santa Fe. So she's there. Whether or not they put her on the stand is another story. Whether or not she testifies is another story. And it could be Baldwin that calls her as well. Alec Baldwin and his team, they could call her and we could have a wrestling match over whether or not she has to invoke her Fifth Amendment right in front of the jury, which could be very powerful in and of itself, because we know Alec Baldwin is going to do anything and everything he can do to blame this on her.
So interesting. Also, for part of today, we have seen time and time again these sidebar conversations between the judge and between both sides. Can you kind of explain what they may be talking about as those microphones are muted?
Well, that's a great question, Stephanie. There's a lot of great places to eat in Santa Fe, and I'm sure that what they're doing when they go up there is they're talking about what good restaurants they're going to go to for lunch and where they're going to go and have dinner. Things like that. Or they could be just talking about things that they don't want to repeat in front of the jury. That's sort of what they do there. And a lot of times you don't want to, a lawyer, you can get sort of in trouble, right? You don't want to draw the ire of the judge. So a lot of times, if I want to explain to the judge why I'm making a certain objection, I might ask to approach, or the judge may just say, look, this is a conversation that we don't need to have in front of the jury. When you're talking to the jury, the tube is coming out of the toothpaste and you can't put it back in. So if you say something out loud that everybody wishes you had kept muffled at first, you're really playing with fire. So it's just another way of measuring twice, cutting once. Or they could be talking about who's got the best tacos or tapas or pizza in town. That could be too.
I also want to ask you this, Jeremy. Alec Baldwin, of course, is a very well-known movie star. The judge, of course, always instructs the jury, no matter what jury it is, to separate, right, maybe the celebrity or the status of an individual from really what needs to be the focus. But we also saw in the courtroom Stephen Baldwin, who's also very well known in his own right, and Alec Baldwin's wife, Hilaria, who's also well known. How might that influence? I imagine in addition to supporting Alec Baldwin, there also might be a strategy there.
That's important stuff. And a lot of times as lawyers, we overlook that. We get so caught up, the attorneys do, in footnote 7. And was the car green? Was the car blue? Was the sky gray? We get really caught up in that. And then the first question that the jury asks when they come back after days and days is, was that his wife in the front row? Who is that in the front row? That matters. And it shows the jury that there is a support system, that those people care, that they are real people. Maybe you and I, maybe people who don't like Alec Baldwin, maybe we think that that's theater, and maybe it is. We don't know these things. But those types of things, they matter to juries, and that's what that's what we call jury putty. And it can really work to your advantage. And sometimes if people are not there, the jury will also notice that, hey, nobody came for this guy. And we were wondering about that. That can happen.
So interesting. So, Jeremy, as we look towards future testimony, again, we're only in day 1. Anything that you're anticipating, anything that you're really keeping a very close eye on?
The one thing that could really be a game changer here, the defense won that really big victory on Monday, which is that Alec Baldwin, they can't bring in any of the producing facts. The defense can open the door if they're not careful, meaning that if they sort of infer that Alec Baldwin was at the head of this, but did a really good job, the prosecution can get up there and say, okay, judge, you told we weren't going to get into this. This is their fault. They did it. They opened the door. Now we get to go in. That would be a game changer in this case, and that would really shift the dynamic. If my attention is paid to anything out of the ordinary, it's going to be that.
Well, I guess his defense attorneys are going to have to be very careful in how they phrase things. Jeremy, thank you so much for taking the time to join us as the court just wrapped up, now in recess moments ago. So we appreciate you hopping on to really parse this all down.
You got it. They're getting lunch.
And they're getting lunch. Okay, so there we go. We are expected that testimony is going to resume. So thank you for that. And in fact, I think they're going to go until, what is it, 7 o'clock tonight. And so we might be anticipating several more witnesses taking the stand. So there we go. Jeremy Rosenthal, the jury is taking a lunch break. They're expected to resume after that. So we appreciate you hopping on.
Bye-bye.